My name is Mike. I'm a photographer. I live in a van, and this is well outside of my comfort zone, but I'm going to do the best I can. All right. All right. I have to go through this quickly because there's quite a lot to do. I was born in New Jersey. My mother was born in Philadelphia. Those are both foreshadowing. Let's go back to the beginning. We came over from slavery. We came over from Africa into slavery and were, if I had to go by, and since there's no record stating the obvious, if I had to go by what I know of Jackson people, at this point, we were likely enslaved for probably about 7 minutes. And that probably includes unloading off the boat time. I come from a long line of runners. Might explain the RV. My mother chased her demons around this country at least 3 times with me and my brother in tow. And there may have been good reason for that. There may have been good reason for me wanting to travel so much. I didn't mind all the traveling. I kind of liked it. It was nice getting out and seeing new things and meeting new people, new kids and stuff. But it may have been in my blood. Okay, let's go back to Africa. We get here from Africa. We're probably enslaved for about 7 minutes. I did the Ancestry.com thing, found out as much as I could about my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family doesn't have much to do with this story. They came from Scotland and Africa. But back to my mother's side of the family, they came from Africa and Africa. Africa and the Seminole tribe. Now, as far as Ancestry.com is concerned, and we'll go back even further than that, as a matter of fact. We'll go back even further than that. My cousin on my cousin on my mother's side of the family, my Uncle Steve's daughter, found out somehow, but pre-Ancestry.com, that we are half Seminole. A guy named Reuben married the first escaped Jackson, as best I can tell, and they had a bunch of kids, 3 or 4 of which are accounted for. At least one was sold back into slavery. He was a bit of a boozer. Boozing runs in my family. Weirdly enough, me and my brother don't drink. More than once a year is a lot for me. And my brother, never seen him drink alcohol at all. It's just not. We were so exposed to it that pass. We know the potential in our blood. Pass. Being half Scottish and half Seminole. I'm not going to take my chance on that one. So anyways, back to Seminole Indians. We escaped slavery very likely in Georgia. At the time, Spain owned Florida. And the Seminoles were fighting him. But come to find out through TikTok, of all places, stuff that TikTok teaches you that school never did. I didn't know that both Mexican and what we call Indians are Native Americans. And the word Mexican and Indian don't exist in their culture. Those aren't the words. They were different tribes, different families that had their own names, had their own languages, had their own currency, had their own agriculture and cities, huge cities. But more back to the point, I'm finding all this out from TikTok. TikTok tells me that the Seminole tribes both had slaves and helped some of the freed slaves, which is not uncommon for Native Americans to have slaves. Apparently it was our thing to be enslaved. Who knew? What you're good at. And the Seminole tribes, we married into the Seminole tribes a guy named Reuben, and he was a bit of a boozer. And as far as I can tell, of the many kids that they had, at least 5 through Ancestry.com, which later confirmed what my cousin found out, that it was a guy named Reuben. It's right there on Ancestry.com. A guy named Reuben married one of the first escaped or free Jacksons, I'm guessing escaped. And they had a bunch of kids. He sold at least one of the kids back into slavery. Those kids, at least one of them, my great grandmother, because this is the one that married Reuben was my great grandmother. She had a bunch of kids that were in Georgia. Those kids, at least one of them, my grandmother, my great grandmother, went to Philadelphia at some point. We don't really know what the story is. She married a set musician. My great grandfather, Steve, married a set musician who, side note, by the way, was in a fight down on the docks because some guy was beating up a girl, or at least that's what the romantic story is, was beating up a girl, got stabbed in the arm, died of sepsis in a major American city. That's what it was like to be black in the 60s. And weirdly enough, my mother broke her arm as a 10-year-old little girl and had to drive through the night to find a doctor that would treat a little girl with a broken arm. But what did she say? America's not a racist country? I got my doubts. So anyways, back to Philadelphia. At some point, my great grandmother goes to, and what was her name? My great grandmother goes to Philadelphia, marries a set musician named Steve. He dies shortly before my mother is born. My mother is born, and then shortly thereafter, her mother dies, and no one has pictures of her. But my uncles used to tell my mom that if you want to see what your mother looked like, just look in the mirror. They're the only ones who know what she looks like. Which is one of the reasons I'm dedicated to photography the way I am, portrait photography specifically. Because I want us to be able to see what we look like 100 years ago, which is today. Today is 100 years ago for somebody in the future. So get a portrait taken, because that's all that's going to survive. Anyways, my mother has 2 kids. She meets a guy named George. Not George. No, George was later on. She meets my brother's father. My brother has a baby with him, my brother, and then they're no longer together. And then she marries a guy named Donald McGee. Donald McGee, red hair and freckles, has one child with my mother and many other children scattered across the country. Johnny Appleseed has many children. Call him Donnie Appleseed. And I'm one of those kids. And come to find out that I had sisters in the next town over, that I had Donna and Cheryl, that who knew? And later met them later on in life. I still have, my mother chased her demons around this country at least 3 times with me and my brother in tow. And I loved it. I don't know how my brother felt about all the traveling, but I loved it. I loved all the traveling. It was in my blood, apparently. Being from a long line of runaway slaves makes you get ants in your pants. Makes you need to hit the Oregon Trail, which might explain living in an RV. Who knew? Anyways, my mother's chasing her demons around the country, and as kids, and then once I move out when I'm 13, what do? I start traveling immediately. Immediately. I was one of my first, out of my little group of friends in New Jersey, I was the first one to really go anywhere. Everybody else had been down to Georgia, Atlanta. We all had family, so forth, so on, up and down the East Coast. As black people, everybody's got a cousin in Virginia. Everybody's got a cousin in Georgia. Apparently, I have family in Georgia too, but I have never met them. So immediately I start traveling. And I had this weird proclivity that now is starting to make sense, because in my travels, what do? I loved, as a young man, I loved Puerto Rican women. That's just the way I went. It was but what I didn't know was at the time that I was half Seminole. Half black, half Scottish, and another half black. And now it's starting to make sense. Why I am the way I am. Number one, I was probably part of one of the nomadic tribes that made up the Seminoles. Number one, there were lots of nomadic Native Americans. Why I always leaned, I married a black girl. The first girl I married was, weirdly enough, she was half Lenni Lenape. I saw a picture of her great grandmother in full headdress, full everything. But she didn't look. She was a very tall, dark-skinned black woman. And turns out that that's probably why. Because you marry your parents and your grandparents. You marry your parents. Let's just get that out of the way. As much as you hate your parents, you end up marrying them in the end. What are you going to do? So I marry a dark-skinned, half Lenni Lenape woman in New Jersey, get divorced, move to New Mexico because I had to travel. I knew I needed to leave New Jersey, and I didn't know why at the time in 2003. I had to travel. We moved to New Mexico, immediately fall in love with it. Immediately fall in love with New Mexico within minutes. As a matter of fact, I interviewed in Arizona for a job doing autopsies. First, I flew to Arizona because I figured, all right, I live in Arizona. It's near my brother. It sounds like, makes sense. Live next to my brother. I go to interview next to my brother in Arizona for the medical examiner there and get the job. Get the job in 2003. Okay, fine. Sounds like a plan. I accept. What they didn't know was I was also going to drive to New Mexico the next day to University of New Mexico Hospital. Got the job there too. So then it was just a choice. I'm going to New Mexico because I fell in love with it the minute I came over 9 Mile Hill and I saw the city and the pink highways, immediately fell in love and knew this is where I wanted to be. Accepted the job in New Mexico, which is another story, and knew that one day I was going to start a business anyways. So here we are with photography. And get to New Mexico with a half black, half Lenni Lenape wife, and didn't know she was Lenni Lenape at the time. Get to New Mexico, get divorced, single for a long time, and then what do? Who's next up to bat? Mexican woman. It's in my blood, apparently. And I've always been attracted to Mexican culture. I was one of 3 lowriders in New Jersey. I had a 77 Monte Carlo. My friend Dwayne had a 64 Impala convertible. And there was a white guy who had like a Cadillac or something with hydraulics. We were the only ones with hydraulics in New Jersey at the time. In the 90s, when there was no internet and you had to order everything out of the back of a lowrider magazine and you didn't know whether it was going to show up or not, we were the only 3. And so this has been my whole life. It just hasn't changed. So then TikTok comes along. After the pandemic, I didn't sign up for TikTok until 2002. Early 2002 was the first time because I figured, okay, this is where everybody's advertising their business now. Fine, I'll advertise on TikTok. In the meantime, I'm finding out that most, if not all, of what I was taught in school was false, was all lies. And more importantly, what I was told about Native Americans and their history here was all lies, because by the best estimation, there were well over 400 million Native Americans in this country. And they likely didn't want to be enslaved. No one was there, so we really don't know the whole story, but I'm guessing they didn't want to be slaves. So they fought back. Fortunately for them. But then someone delivered smallpox to them. But anyways, I said all that to say, that's why I like Native women. Not Indian. I've never really been attracted to Indian women at all. But Mexican? Oh, that was my jam. Selena? A little thin. She's a little thin. But that was my jam. Jennifer Lopez, that was my jam. But it's interesting that in all that, I find out the facts about the Native Americans, the facts about the best possible known facts about Native Americans, both Mexican and what we call Indian or Diné. And I find out as much as we can the truth about my own people through a social media app, and then find out why I was never taught that information. Because according to one of the front runners, America's not racist, right?